Welcome to another program in our series, Freethinking Forum. I'm Bill Weir, and it's my pleasure today to welcome Brian Toren.
Thank you.
An expert on futurism. Brian, why don't you tell us first, what is a futurist?
Well, in a broad sense, everyone is a futurist. Anyone who plans for the future, which we all do, maybe a movie next week or dinner tonight. We teach children at a very early age to consider the consequences of their actions. And this is basically teaching them to think about their future as well as the future of others. Then there are the professional futurists, people who do futures work or futures research. They work for think tanks, businesses, governments, organizations, large organizations. And some of them sell their futures, individuals, in doing futures research. They use tools in helping do planning. And we'll talk about that later. When futurists talk about their profession, they call it future studies, foresight, futurism, and future research. They all pretty much mean the same thing. Then there are the visionaries. They do not necessarily use futurist tools. In fact, most of them existed before the tools existed. They're the inventors, the planners, the dreamers, and doers that are working towards a goal. The non-professionals are those who are interested in the future. They don't make money at it. They use futurist tools if they're aware of them. And they're involved in things like the World Future Society, the Minnesota Futurists, or whatever chapter in the state they live in.
But they don't make a living at it.
No, not necessarily.
So how far in the future do futurists plan?
It varies. Businesses plan short and long futures, strategic planning. The government do long-term and very long-term 10-year forecasts. The future of Social Security or Medicare, which is out a ways, and they're doing a lot of thinking on. Think tanks, some business managers also go into long-term futures. Herman Kahn, in his book Thermonuclear Warfare and the Year 2000, were written back in 1967, looking at the future from that viewpoint.
We're 33 years before.
Yes,
yeah.
33 years ago.
Looking ahead.
Right, absolutely.
So,
and then there are a lot of individuals do more short-term, looking for a new house, planning next summer's vacation, or if it's longer-term, a 5-year job, or planning for retirement. And it is not easy. To quote Niels Bohr, it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future.
So what different kinds of futures thinking are there?
There are pop futurists. These are the shallow, superficial level of futures thinking, and by far the most widespread. It's well known, it's popular, highly media oriented.
Most TV programs.
Yes, probably, yeah. The TV programs, articles, popular books, sound bites, they'll take a long sentence or a paragraph on global warming and pick out 3 or 4 words. The oceans are rising with no further comments on when or where or why or how.
So pop futures don't go in depth?
No, no. Then there's problem-oriented futurists. This is more serious attempts to look at the deeper issues and their causes by professionals who do the futures research. It is often concerned how organizations and society might or ought to respond to challenges lying in the nearer-term future. It is where most of corporate strategic thinking is conducted. It often touches on big picture problems such as climate change, soil erosion, ozone layer depletion, salinity. Most futures work takes place in this realm. The critical futures attempt to probe beneath the future, or beneath the surface. How did we create this problem in the first place? Take population growth, which seems to be getting more than the Earth can handle. What causes its growth? Why are we doing it? the global warming, what is causing it, how can we solve these problems. Then we have the epistemological futurists, and that's the deepest level. It's a foundation, the futures field that feeds into the whole enterprise. We're talking about philosophy, ontology, epistemology, far above my pay grade.
So the realm of academicians. So
Yes, yes.
I noticed you use both the words prediction and forecast. Is there a difference?
No. According to the dictionary, they mean exactly the same thing. I got in a big discussion with my brother about this, and I've been trying to figure out the difference or how to explain the difference. Futurists cringe at the use of prediction because it speaks of crystal balls, fortune tellers, and so forth. They prefer the use of forecasts or envisioning, where they can lie out more than one possibility and choose the one that they would rather have, a goal that they can work towards. When a fortune teller or an astrologist makes a prediction, they want it to be 100% true. It's going to happen. The world is going to come to the end on October 13th, 2093. And of course, it hasn't happened yet. But the recipients of it also absolutely believe 100% it's going to happen.
Not everyone.
No, not everyone, but many, many. People have sold their homes when they heard the end of the world was coming. Futurists talk about forecasting in the sense of envisioning a future. What are breakthroughs? What are the things that can happen to make these happen? So there's a good chance it may not come true at all. And they forecast more than one possibility. So there's a lot of difference between that and just predicting something's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So how does a futurist envision the future then?
There are 3 laws to futurism. 1, the future is not predetermined. We don't know what it is yet. It is not predictable. If it's not predetermined, you can't predict it. And you can change the future, which sounds like...
You can?
Yes, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's true.
Right.
You can change the future. So understand this, when futurists do future research, they use the following methodology. 1, they select a future to be researched, be it the global warming or the oceans rising or whatever it may be. They just pick a study they're going to make. And then they list all of the possible things that could happen in this future, in this realm. And there will be many more than that study. So they look at what's plausible. What are the things that are happening today that are logical and are probably going to happen, and they narrow this list down to a few less. And then they look at the probable. Out of these possible, plausible futures, there's only a few that are going to be probable. And they look at those. And finally, they list the preferable futures. Out of this dozen probable futures, what are the 2 or 3 that they would prefer to happen? And that's what they want to work towards. That's what they want to see if they can make changes now that would address those futures. And in doing that, they look at hidden consequences, or should look at the hidden consequences. If we do this in our future, what happens over here and what happens over there?
So there are many individuals interested in forecasting, but have their own very successful methods, aren't there?
They have their own methods. They do their own research. They don't go through that list. They narrow down to what they want to find a future on, and they're very successful because they do a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of work, and a lot of keeping up with what's happening in the real world, what the trends are, and work those in, and they can be very successful.
What's their goal?
Their role?
Goal.
Oh, their goal is to steer. If they have a goal they really like, they want to be able to steer towards that future by taking the approaches today that can do so.
Good. So you talked about tools a couple of times. What are some of the tools that futurists use?
Well, first there is trend extrapolation. Trend extrapolation is looking at what things are doing. We see the oceans warming up, and that's a trend, and it's continuing, and then we're saying there's something wrong. Why are the oceans warming up? And you need to be careful because trends change. Alvin Toffler, in his book, The Future Trends, used trends to make his 10 predictions for the future, and he looked at how things were going, and he looked far enough ahead to see that these possibly could continue. So it wasn't just a guess in the dark that this is the way it's always been, this is the way it's always going to be.
But trends change.
Trends do change, absolutely.
So what else do you use? What are your other tools?
One of the popular ones of the professional is the Delphi polling. And Delphi polling is used a lot by think tanks, and in fact, this is what Herman Kahn used to do. They have a question and they ask the experts, what do you think is going to happen here? And they'll ask a dozen people, maybe more, maybe less. They get all of these answers and they merge them in together into a new question. And they send that question out to the same experts, and they take a new look at it, maybe get some new ideas, maybe get some new feelings about the future, and they send their answers in again. And they'll do that 2 or 3 times.
So a succession of questions narrowing down
right.
based upon their previous answers.
Yeah, trying to get everybody's ideas incorporated.
So,
and then once that's done, they use that as this is where we think the future is going.
Yeah.
And it works very well. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. You don't do that overnight.
Yeah.
And an implications wheel is good for business planning.
Looking at the implications?
The implications of opening a new store in Rosemont or in Prior Lake or somewhere. What does that mean? Is it going to cost more money? Are we going to have people? Will it take work from our other stores? Are they too close? That sorts of thing. And then as they get a list of implications, they don't have just 1 or 2, but maybe a dozen, then each of those has implications. If we do it this way, what are the implications? If we do it that way, what are the implications? And so they can find a path of least risk through the implications that they're finding addressing these individual things.
But I've heard about simulations that you can do on the computers now.
Yes, simulation, a good example is weather forecasting.
Yeah.
They have several very large running in supercomputers, weather forecasting. Weather forecasting, they divide the whole atmosphere up into chunks. And they look at each chunk and see what its temperature, what the wind is, what's going on, and then they merge that all together to determine what the weather is going to affect. It's going to be here on Earth. Mm-hmm. And
so they can simulate what will come next.
Right, and they can test these things. They continue to modify them. They continue to make smaller and smaller chunks of what they're investigating, which takes bigger and bigger computers because you're looking at many, many more things. And then they can take the variables that they input into the simulator and input those same variables for a few years ago to see if it can or a few weeks ago, and see if they come up and predict the same thing that the model does now, or what actually happened.
Yeah.
So they can test them by looking at their guesswork compared against reality. Scenarios is like writing a science fiction story, but it's more pointed towards realism. So
building on what they've learned from the other tools. Right.
You have trends. You have what all these things, whatever are, and you can write a story about it. If this happens, for instance, if the water rises on the coast of Florida, you can write 2 kinds of stories about that. One that Hollywood loves, where the Florida is destroyed, and the other where they can lay out in a fiction story a way that they can move people or possibly put in dikes or whatever to lower that possibility. there are always breakthroughs, things you don't know are going to happen, and then they happen. The technological breakthroughs, they can be social breakthroughs, and so on and so forth. And so you surmise ahead of time, well, what could happen here that would make this a better or a different future, good and bad.
I can imagine a breakthrough in opening up the Northwest Passage so that ships can go from Europe to Asia over north of Alaska.
Right, and what impact does that have on the futures of trade? And
a very graphic breakthrough.
And right now it could be very real.
It is. So what about unintended consequences?
Well, every study must look for the unintended consequences. If you're going to forecast this future and decide we like that future, we're going to do things to make it happen, you have to look at what are the unintended consequences of that happening. Mm-hmm. And I could tell a little story on that if we have time.
Okay.
There was a small town that was very, very popular, very prosperous. But they had one problem. Too many cars, too much pollution, too much noise, because everybody was flocking into town. So they decided, well, we'll lower the speed limit so they drive slower, that'll make the cars less noisy, etc. And to make sure that happens, we'll put in speed bumps. So they did that. Well, lo and behold, over time, people found out that one, driving 20 miles an hour, they had to drive in second gear rather than third. They had more noise, right? They drove longer, now it's 30 minutes instead of 20. They pollute more. And so people stopped coming. They said, well, I'm not going to go through that. I can drive to the next town just as quick and do my shopping. And as a result, the town started going bankrupt.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences of what was a very logical idea.
So, where do these tools come from?
Mainly from professionals, have probably a STEM or economics background.
Now, STEM means
science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
The acronym STEM.
The acronym STEM.
Yeah.
So, economists are some of the early creators of tools that futurists use because they were trying to forecast the economic future, and they needed some kind of tool to help them do that. You don't have to be a professional to design them. That's where most of them come from, like the Delphi method and the implications wheel and so on. You can create your own, and some people do. I created one and used it called bracketing, where I took a football or a baseball and basketball bracketing. Mm-hmm. And instead of putting people's names, you put in possible futures. And then which ones come, and you'd end up down to the most possible one. So you can create your own.
So there are other disciplines that can be even necessary for a good futurist.
Absolutely. Prime in my list is systems thinking. The whole world is a system. It's not a bunch of isolated things happening. And most things are. A family is a system. A business is a system. And when you're talking about the future, you have to look at the impact on all these individual items within the system. Because if you poke the balloon here, the air is going to come out over there. And the same thing in the system. If you don't use a methodological approach to creating this future or trying to create the future you want, you have to take into account all of these things. Critical thinking, of course, goes with anything, but it's very important in the future, so you're very critical about your thinking and how you do it. You want a strategic focus, not a tactical, where immediate things. You want to strategize out further. You need vision, and you must be able to have visions of the future, of what you want the future to be. And of course, an open mind and a desire to learn.
So, can you give examples of more long-term and short-term forecasts?
The real one we talked about, the longest term that we're looking at right now, is global warming. I read my first book on global warming in 1966, and it's slowly been happening ever since. Some people don't believe that yet. Our They maybe believe it's
paid
happening.
not to believe.
Yeah, they're paid, or they'll say, yeah, it's happening, but we're not causing it. So that's a long-term vision. There are futurists that predict out 30 years, 50 years, 100 years. That's long-term. Then short-term is, I dare you to predict who's going to win or forecast who's going to win, either the Republican or the Democratic candidate.
I know who I want to win.
Right. And many people say, I want them to win, they're going to win, because they feel strongly. And polls and media make it difficult to make a prediction, but there are those that study the polls and the trends of the polls and a lot of other stuff that can actually come pretty close, pretty accurate to determining who they think is going to win. We can predict to 100% accuracy that there will be an election everywhere in the U.S.
Well, that's 100% prediction.
First Tuesday in November. However, it's nearly 100% because a 10 Richter earthquake could hit San Francisco or somewhere along the coast the day before the election, and there'll be a lot of people that aren't voting, and there's even a possibility that it could close the whole country down. So
Wow. Yeah,
you can't make 100%. It's like quantum mechanics. It's probability.
Well, let's go back now to the first futurists. What did they try to do?
They were our early ancestors. The Cro-Magnon man that first buried clothes and food with one of their members who died was thinking about the future. Before that, it was just going out and hunting. I know every day they were going to go out and hunt and bring back some food, but this was thinking long-term future. What's going to happen to me when I die?
Yeah.
Not much you can do about it, but
well,
they planned for it by giving them food and clothing, so they had a trip.
I think they didn't have the accurate tools
Right.
we have today for predicting. But you're right. There have been cultures that buried food and other
Yes.
clothing, other items
Yes.
with the dead.
Thousands of years ago.
Um,
The roots of futurist thinking are the imaging. The imaging in human minds can be traced back to the beginning of human societies. They're raising crops, raising grain.
Yeah.
They want enough to last all winter, so they plan ahead. They think, well, we can't grow during the winter, so we're going to have to store some of this stuff. So they built storage bins and so on, and were able to do that. The formalized study came much later, much later, like today. But
well, didn't the Greek philosopher Plato do
Yes.
something?
he developed a concept of an ideal society, which he wrote in the Republic. And his vision inspired millions of thinkers to imagine the future. Many people who read that book.
But there were some early non-professional futurists. I think of Thomas More.
Thomas More wrote Utopia, early 16th century, based on Plato's Republic. But he took a different step. In his future, there was poverty and misery and reigned all over, and they called it utopia. Well, I call it a dystopia, and there is such a word.
Yes.
The utopias people talk about nowadays normally been happier places, but one we get to envision but can't get back to again, like Shangri-La. The Nikola Tesla, he invented the AC current. He envisioned global free electricity, a system where you could just plug into the earth, because the earth was a conductor anywhere on earth, and get electricity out.
Well, we're getting pretty close to that.
Yeah.
Some of these electric car charging stations now.
Yes, yes.
I see some at some of the churches encouraging people to use their electric car.
And Tesla has charging stations on a main route across the country about every 250 miles apart. There's one in my hometown of Worthington. So you can drive from station to station, because you can get 300 miles an hour theoretically with a car, and you can go cross country without buying a drop of gas.
I don't think they're going to go 300 miles an hour.
No, 300 miles. Did I say an hour? 300 miles. They could, but no.
No, 300 miles on a charge,
Right.
per charge.
He also visioned video phones
Really?
And holograph. He wrote a book in which he talked about holography.
He was a forethinker.
He was. And time travel.
Yeah.
Of course, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, the phonograph, the movie camera. He was a visionary. He would think far in the future.
And not only a visionary, he was
a creator. Yeah.
Creating.
He was a doer. Yeah. As was Nikola. Leonardo da Vinci.
And he envisioned
helicopters, submarines. And then for the helicopters, he had parachutes. And for the submarines, he had scuba gear.
Wow.
He was really thinking ahead.
I don't think he quite qualifies as the inventor, though.
No, his were on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had pictures of them. You can go online and find them. Aldous
Huxley, yeah.
19th century. He looked at biological wars. Technology just completely running amok. Biological wars, test tube babies, individual rights and freedom were curtailed. His was another dystopia.
Warning us not to fall into that trap.
Yes, yes.
And
Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, he was known for what was called the omega point. The omega point is where the evolution of the universe and of man reaches a very complex consciousness. And that's what he felt the universe was evolving towards that point. As a result, he talked about the noosphere.
N-double-O?
The what?
Noosphere?
Noosphere.
Yeah.
His invention. There were two stages already thought to be in existence. One was called the geosphere, which was the forming of the Earth and the Moon and everything. And then the biosphere was the life on Earth and eventually evolving into mankind. And the noosphere is where we are at present, evolving even further in consciousness.
And he foresees our transition in the future.
Right, and there's others look at that would probably think of the singularity, which...
Yeah, well, let's focus on the influential futurists of the last 50 years.
Buckminster Fuller had many ideas, many designs and inventions regarding inexpensive shelter, the geodesic dome.
Yeah, geodesic dome.
Yeah. And there were quite a few of them built, and I had designed a home of one myself at one time, on paper. I could never have afforded it, but... And the Dymachian car, which is a very, very streamlined car, which would be very efficient gas-wise because of the airflow around it.
Mm-hmm.
The Bertrand de Jouvenel created the Futurables International in 1960.
Oh.
And this was a Paris-based, international, independent, private, nonprofit organization, network of many people on future studies.
Wow, good for him.
That, right.
So you got people working together?
Yes, in a network. Well, Ed Cornish, who created the World Future Society and has written papers and books on the future, like the exploration of the future, was turned on by some of these people in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Alvin Toffler, do you remember him?
Yes.
He was the future trends, future shock, third wave. The first wave is the agrarian society revolution. Right after that revolution, that was the first wave. The second wave is a society during the Industrial Revolution, which some of us have lived through. The third wave is post-industrial society, which we're moving into now. Manufacturing is going down, and we're getting more into the knowledge and information age.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there may be a fourth wave.
You are predicting a fourth wave.
And I call that a post-work society.
Uh-huh.
As more and more jobs are taken by robots and computers and possibly AI someday, there'll be more and more people not working. They'll be able to do what they want to do.
I know some people are planning toward that.
Yeah, I'm one.
But what are some of the other recent
Well, if you get into the present, still living, and Alvin Toffler and Ed Cornish are one of those, but Michio Kaku, who is a professor of theoretical physics, has produced many videos about the future, a few of which I've shown at our Saturday meetings. He's talking about robotics, medicine, biogenetics, the brain, brain communication with computers and between humans and so on. And he's written several books on the future. Two of them I like are the Physics of the Future, because I'm an amateur physicist, and Future of the Mind, which is very fascinating. And of course, we all know Ray Kurzweil, inventor of the Segway. He was a pioneering computer scientist, and his vision is the one that includes a singularity that merges brains and computers. And right now he is the director of engineering at Google.
Oh.
Elon Musk,
he was in the news lately.
He was. He just landed he landed a spaceship, a booster, brought it back to Earth and landed it on solid ground.
So it could be used again.
Yes. And it went into a museum, so it won't be.
Oh.
But the other goal was to land it on a floating platform. And he tried it 4 times and failed every time. And he finally, the 5th time, he landed it on a floating platform off the coast of Florida. Now, why would he want to do that?
To use it again.
No, but why on a floating platform?
Well, because if he missed it, there wouldn't be too many people around.
Well, that's true. But the other thing is, when we launch into a geodesic orbit, the rocket is out over the ocean when it burns out. And it doesn't have enough fuel to get back to land.
Right.
So they can land it on a platform, wherever it comes down, they can program that wherever it comes down, bring it down, refuel it, launch it again to bring it back to base on land.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And Jeff Bezos wants to build spaceships to take ordinary citizens to near outer space and maybe future space stations. And
so a
those
hotel
are
up in orbit?
Right. Yep. Now these guys aren't all futurists that use the methods and the technology, but they're visionaries.
Well, do we have some local futurists?
Yes, we do. Earl Joseph, who is my mentor for many years, he is now deceased. He was a consulting futurist, and I worked with him for about 4 years as a partner. And we went out and consulted with companies and gave presentations on the futures. He started the Minnesota Futurists back in 1967.
Along with you?
Along with me.
Yeah.
And one other fellow. And the one I remember back in the mid-'80s, he was talking about self-healing limbs.
Wow.
Where you could genetically program to heal themselves. And we're approaching that.
We are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was pretty amazing. Art Harkins, he's a consulting futurist locally.
I've met him, yes.
And he was a prime mover of the University of Minnesota Futures Program.
And wasn't there something about sex education?
Yes, he forecast sex aerobics, which really got a lot of people upset. They didn't like that. One of their partners, Earl and Art and Nelson Otto, were partners at one time, and Otto was a consulting futurist in education, the future of education and things in education. One of our local people who you know is George Kubik.
Yeah.
He's a consulting futurist. He's president emeritus of Minnesota Futurists. And he also worked with Art in the University of Minnesota Futurist program. And he co-authored a book called Strengthening Environmental Foresight, a potential contribution to future research.
That sounds very important.
Yeah. And finally, the implications wheel came from Joel Barker, a local consulting futurist. And he works with business on strategic planning by, as I explained before, the new marketing plan, new marketing product. They do this implications wheel to see whether it's a good idea or not. So he created that and still uses it.
Well, I'm beginning to see why you're a futurist, and that you really are a genuine futurist.
Well, thank you.
Not just pie in the sky. why are you a futurist?
Well,
I mean, this is a really challenging job, I think.
First, because of science fiction.
Yeah.
I read my first science fiction story, really out there. They had fairy tales and stuff, but really out there was Rocket Ship Galileo, where a bunch of high school kids built a rocket ship to go to the moon. I thought that was really neat. I also read Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov, and then Earl. He really influenced me. He came up and asked me, "Do you want to help me start this futurist group locally?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I was fascinated what your imagination can do.
Well, now a lot of people read science fiction.
Yes.
But are they considered futurists?
Oh, they can be, yeah. Science fiction writers do a lot of predicting in the unfolding of their stories. Robert Heinlein predicted the cell phone long before it happened. He said that the contraception and control of disease is going to revise relationships between the sexes. So much so that it may change our higher total social and economic structure. And then interplanetary travel, he said, we're going to be buying tickets to these places. And that's what Elon Musk and Bezos are trying to do. But Russia's already done it.
Yeah.
For $2.5 million, anybody can hop on a spaceship and go to the ISS.
Only $2.5 million?
Yeah, only $2.5 million.
So, when and how did you become more involved in futures research than reading science fiction?
I guess when I got into the futurists,
1967.
I had a couple other people I wanted to mention.
Oh, okay.
In the science fiction. Arthur Clarke.
Yes.
Who you know, he had 8 predictions that including the geostationary satellite, the global library, which we're trending towards, cell phone as we know it. He wrote Childhood's End, where a alien invasion of the Earth called the Overlords tried to take over the supervision of our international affairs because we were doing so poorly. He wrote a whole series of books on that. Jules Verne, electronic submarines, and where did they get their power? They think they got the electricity through a nuclear power of some sort. Never said that, but this is what the people reading the book think. That's what he must have done. He also wrote a book on man going to the moon.
Oh.
And he also talked about holographic projections in a book he wrote where the people that they saw were not real people, they were just holographic projections. Gene Roddenberry, who we all know, Star Trek, the warp drive, the replicator, the transporter, and we don't have warp drive, but we have replicators called 3D printing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and they're getting better and better. They can now print human organs.
Really?
They can print food.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. And we have actually transported, by the same means he did, atoms from one point in the lab to another point in the lab via a machine. So humans are much more complicated than an atom, but they have done it.
Yeah.
Isaac Asimov, he forecast Skype, FaceTime, and he said robots for everybody in 2014. Well, we're not quite there yet, but there's more and more personal robots.
Well, yes, in Japan, I understand there
Yeah.
are robots in nursing homes.
Yes.
Taking care of the elders there in a better way than a person would.
Yep, they're very patient.
And they work 24 hours a day.
The other thing they've created is a robot seal, the white harp seal. And they wanted to give something to people, elderly and so on, that comforted them.
Yeah.
And they didn't do a cat or a dog because they said cats and dogs, they have expectations. And if they don't act like a cat and a dog, they won't use it. They found this out. So they created this thing, which is a very soft, flurry, wiggly, and it purrs, or not purrs, but makes sounds of contentment when they stroke it, and it really works, because they don't know what it's supposed to do.
A virtual pet.
Yeah, a virtual pet.
So, well, you've been on quite a trip.
Hugo Gernsback, 16. Hugo Gernsback invented the term science fiction many years ago, and he's honored by the Hugo Awards in science fiction.
Oh, I've heard of the Hugo Award. Didn't
Right.
know where it came from.
Yep, that's the man. And he wrote a book called Ralph 124C 41 Plus. And if you look at it carefully and critically, it says 124C 41.
Oh.
So it was a helping robot. So that was a contribution to futurism.
Yeah?
Have you heard of John Brunner?
No.
He wrote a book called Stand on Zanzibar, and it was about overpopulation.
Yeah.
Because there was no room. Everybody was standing cheek and jowl. And the resulting dystopian world.
Unfortunately, that may be coming all too true.
And we can't forget Chester Gould, Dick Tracy, wrist radio,
Oh,
Facebook.
of course, the wrist radio on Dick Tracy.
Right.
So you became more involved in futures research and read science fiction less.
Yes, yes. And there is a difference between science fiction and futurism. In science fiction, the authors take an invention or a process. Could be an invention of teleporting, say.
Mm-hmm.
And then you as a reader have to accept that invention. Yeah, those don't exist. They may never exist. But for reading the story, I'll believe they do exist. And then the story is very plausible, contained within that boundary. Futurists do a similar thing, except they look at things that do exist and write them into a story, a very plausible story, on the impact that they may have on civilization. So one of them is, they're both fiction, but one is internally consistent and the other is consistent in that this really could happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference.
So a more realistic version of envisioning.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So and you were a partner in that as futures consulting?
Yeah,
Anticipatory sciences?
right. I got into that with Earl when he and his partners broke up, and he moved to another office, and I retired from UNIVAC, and he asked me to join him in his office and work with him. So we worked with, as I said, local companies, local businesses, and so on. I had worked for Earl as a programmer for about 10 years, 10, 11 years. And my own little contribution, and it was Earl's idea, I designed a browser for the company library and company papers and so on and so forth.
Good.
So I did a browser back in 1967.
That was a lot earlier than most of them.
Yeah, never went anywhere. They canceled the thing. But anyway, when he lost his job, he managed to convince UNIVAC that they needed a futurist. And they created a special title for him, Senior Futurist, and then he did a lot of their marketing work and so on and so forth. Sold a lot of computers for him.
Good. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about the World Futures Society.
Yes.
Did that come before Minnesota Futurists?
Oh yes, not long, but it did come before. It's a Washington, D.C. organization. It has a global membership. And it's the first membership organization designed for people who research, envision, and so on. And they want to improve decision making by empowering the futurists, fostering networks, advancing knowledge, and action on future critical incidences. So they provide robust tools. They got cutting edge ideas and opportunities for these people to work with and confer with each other.
Well, and this is the essence of collaboration
Yes.
that they are fostering.
Yeah.
And this is how humans are distinguished from other primates,
Right, right.
that we can collaborate at such a much higher level. So when did the World Future Society start? Was it?
Ed Cornish, who we mentioned before, he first envisioned it in 1961. When the Cold War was in full swing, and the final straw for him was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm not sure where you were, but I was on the East Coast in Whippany, New Jersey at Bell Labs when that was going on, and people were really scared, believe me.
Yeah, I was quite aware of it.
So he thought, is there any way that we can decide what can happen in the future? So he started dialogues with his friends, compatriots, hoping that through starting a network, he would be in contact with more people, and that might be interested in joining him. He learned about Bernard D. Jovenel, who started the Futurables, and he read an article in Time magazine called The Futurists, and you can get that. I managed to get that offline and print it out.
And who's that focused on?
Just focusing on Herman Kahn, who we've mentioned, Buckminster Fuller, Bertrand D. Juvenal, and the essay called them Futurists. And then, of course, he had read Herman Kahn's Thermonuclear War, which was about the future if we don't get things under control. And he started getting introduced to other people in think tanks and so on and so forth, and learned some of these processes, Delphi polling and so on. And in '66, he made contact with the Office of Education Research Department and the National Science Foundation. And they had a meeting in that fall in October, and several people interested in this area, and that started the Futures. It was announced at that meeting. And then I became a member about a year later, thanks to Earl.
Well, good. You were one of the pioneers.
I was one of the pioneers, at least locally.
So I don't know whether I need to ask this question. Why be a futurist?
Well,
what do you recommend to the young people out here?
I'm going to live my life there, right? The rest of my life is going to be in the future. And if I don't look at the possibilities and plan for what's going to happen, I could end up living somebody else's future.
Yeah.
So you got to plan your own. And I guess that'd be my advice to young ones. It's, look at the future, plan your future, be careful about it. You want to live your own future. There are good and bad possibilities for the future. You want to be able to delineate and find out which are good, which are bad, and how you're going to influence the good. Everybody has a different idea of what the preferable future is. Some of them not very nice, but I probably many more good visions and preferable futures than bad.
Yeah.
You've got to go for the good.
Now, I think some people would be interested in knowing more about what do Minnesota Futurists do in their meetings.
We talk a lot. As you know, you've been there.
Yes, but give the viewer a feel.
Agenda. We have an agenda. We have a 2-hour meeting, and we start out by
random bits.
Random bits, and half a dozen people come up with what they read in the paper or in a magazine or a book of a future that nobody's heard of, and we talk about it a little bit. And we do that for about 10, 15 minutes, and we introduce everybody around the future and ask them why they're there, what's in it for them. And then we have a presentation on a topic
Somebody
of interest.
is really prepared.
Yep.
A presentation.
Either a member of the group, or if we can find an outside speaker and bring them in, which we've done quite often, they do a presentation. And we have a discussion period. They present some new ideas, some new future, and we talk about what we think and what we can contribute and so on and so forth. So it's just a trading of ideas on futures and getting new ideas on futures. If you want to keep your brain from going senile, that's a good way to do it. It really opens your mind up.
Yes, I think I concur from what I've seen. maybe some of the viewers would be interested in coming.
Yeah.
You want to tell them?
Yep, we have our meetings at the Bloomington Knights of Columbus most Saturday mornings. Sometimes we don't get a speaker and have to delay one. They start at 9:30. The formal presentations start at 10 o'clock and last about an hour and a half. We've done about 11:30 and then have some break time where people can just chat with each other about whatever, or maybe continue with that chat.
Now that's on American Boulevard.
Yes.
Just south of Interstate 494.
Right.
And just west of Lindale.
Right. About not quite halfway in between. Closer to Lindale than to Penn Avenue.
Yeah.
But if you go to our meetup site, meetup. I think it's .org or .com.
.com.
Yeah. And just look. They have a search item there. Just type in MN Futurists, and you'll get our website, which explains a lot more about it.
And you can decide whether you want to join.
Right, and it gives you the next meeting and so on.
Well, good. Well, I think we might add to this program something from the TED Talks that address futurism too.
Oh, sure. Great idea.
Maybe you'd have a recommendation.
I'll take a look. Not off the top of my head, but I'll take a look.
Well, thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you.
Very interesting.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
And thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
I'm Joel Barker, and I'm a futurist. I've spent the majority of my life working with corporations, institutions, and governments all over the world, helping them anticipate, identify, and effectively take advantage of change. Through my work, a fundamental rule has become clear. Finding the answer to a problem is just the first part of the solution. Why is this true? Because we often do not foresee the unintended consequences of our solutions. How often have we been involved in a decision that makes sense at the time, only to cause a cascade of problems as time goes on? So one of your most important tasks is not just to find a solution, but to identify the long-term implications of the solution, both positive and negative, so you can better understand what you are getting into. And this is where the implications wheel comes in. In all my experience, no other tool does a better job at helping organizations understand the full impact of both good and bad decisions. Before we get into the details of the implications wheel, let me give you an analogy to explain how it works. Think back to the wagon trains that crossed the Great Plains of America in the 19th century. Before the wagon masters rolled the wagons, they sent out their scouts for several very good reasons. They wanted to get the lay of the land, to discover any risks that were out there, and any benefits that the wagon train could take advantage of, like green grass and fresh water and firewood. Good scouting involves the following attributes. Speed. A slow scout has no value. Scatter. Going off in different directions so that more territory is covered. Sampling. Because the scouts are riding fast, they can't stop and measure everything. But they do come back with qualitative information that is very useful for the wagon master. And mapping. A scout has to be able to draw useful maps. Otherwise, their knowledge has little use. The implications wheel is a structured discussion process for scouting the future. It works by having you and your fellow collaborators identify short and long-term implications that might develop as a result of some change. The trigger to the change could be an innovation, yours or your competitors, an emerging trend, a new federal regulation, a new internal policy, a significant event of some kind, a new strategic objective. The implications wheel is called a wheel because it is circular in structure. It's very simple to fill one out doing one layer at a time. The pattern looks like this. It starts with the center, like the hub of a wheel. Into the center goes the topic you want to explore. Then the first ring of implications is generated. Each possible implication is a direct consequence of the center, with no significant intervening events between it and the center. We call them first-order implications. The next ring is made up of second-order implications. They are a direct result of the first-order implications with no significant intervening events between the first and the second order. Obviously, the third ring is made up of third-order implications. As you can see, using the implications wheel expands the reach of your strategic thinking far wider and more comprehensively than the discussions we typically have. You get a map of connected implications so you can see the potential pathways to the good implications and the bad implications. And beyond the map of good and bad implications, which is extremely valuable all by itself, the process has effective strategies to assess the risks and rewards of your discoveries. There is a scoring process to identify both the value and the likelihood of each implication. There is a tagging system so you can connect implications with certain groups or functions. And there is a summary system that allows you to highlight the most important implications. This allows you to be able to ask questions like, where is the best place to put up a barrier to a high-threat implication? Where is the most effective place to build a bridge to a high-benefit implication? The structure of the implications wheel makes it easier to determine and act on these kinds of questions. This kind of information allows you to create much more thoughtful strategic plans to achieve your goals and aspirations.